Subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin this one. Wade Doyle stood at his kitchen window, watching the dawn break over the Tennessee hills. At 56, his body still carried the discipline of 24 years training Delta Force operators at Fort Bragg. His hands, scarred and calloused, gripped a mug of black coffee. Those hands had taught some of America's deadliest men how to survive, how to hunt, how to disappear. Now they trembled slightly, not from age or weakness, but from controlled rage. The call had come 3 nights ago. Victoria's roommate, Christy Holman, her voice panicked and breaking. "Mr. Doyle, you need to come to Regional Medical. She's hurt. Bad." Wade had made the 2-hour drive in 90 minutes. When he'd pushed through the emergency room doors, Christy sat in the waiting area, mascara streaked down her face, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She grabbed his arm. It was Alexander. They were fighting about something stupid, her wanting to visit you for the weekend. Mr. Doyle, he went crazy. I heard her screaming from my room. When I got there, he was standing over her. She couldn't breathe. For broken ribs. One had come dangerously close to puncturing her lung. Extensive bruising across her torso and back. The ER doctor, a young woman with tired eyes, had shown Wade the x-rays with clinical detachment, then broken protocol to whisper, "I see this pattern." This wasn't the first time he hit her. The older bruises, the healed fractures in her wrist from 6 months ago, she claimed was a skateboarding accident. Mr. Doyle, she's been covering for him. Wade had sat beside Victoria's hospital bed, watching his daughter sleep under sedation. She'd inherited her mother's delicate features, her auburn hair, her green eyes. Caroline had died from cancer when Victoria was 12. Wade had raised her alone, tried to teach her strength, independence, self-worth. And she'd still ended up with a monster who'd convinced her she deserved his fists. When Victoria had finally woken, she'd seen his face and started crying. Not from pain, but from shame. "Dad, please don't. It was my fault. I pushed him. I know, I shouldn't have." "Stop." Wade's voice had been quiet, but it carried the command of 2 decades ordering men into combat. "None of this is your fault. You understand me? None of it." The police had come. Wade had filed the report himself, gave them Alexander Booker's name and address. The responding officer, a rookie barely old enough to shave, had written everything down, then exchanged a glance with his partner that Wade immediately recognized. Alex said, "This is going nowhere." Wade had done his research that night from Victoria's hospital room, his laptop casting blue light across his face. Alexander Booker, 3, 26 years old, Princeton graduate. His father, Gerard Booker, owned half the commercial real estate in Nashville and sat on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. His mother, Sharon Booker, descended from a family whose name appeared on antebellum plantation records. Old money. The kind that didn't just open doors, it owned the buildings the doors were attached to. The kind that made problems disappear. Victoria spent 4 days in the hospital. Wade stayed with her, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, helping her to the bathroom when the pain medication made her dizzy. Christy visited every day, bringing Victoria's favorite books, her laptop, flowers. On the 3rd day, she'd pulled Wade into the hallway. "He's been texting her," Christy said, showing Wade her phone. Victoria had given her the password, too afraid to look herself. The messages scrolled across the screen. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I was drunk. This is killing me. Your dad is going to ruin everything. Tell him to drop it. We can work this out. I love you. You know I love you. Stop ignoring me. This is serious. My parents are asking questions. Fine. Be a bitch. See what happens." The last message had come that morning. "If your dad thinks he can fuck with my family, he's going to regret it." Wade had memorized every word. Then he deleted nothing, taken screenshots of everything, and started building a file. When a detective finally came to take Victoria's official statement, Wade had recognized another look, pity mixed with resignation. Detective Morris was a woman in her 40s, professional and kind, but her questions were perfunctory. She'd been through this before. "Miss Doyle, walk me through the evening again. What started the argument?" Victoria, her voice small, had recounted it. Alexander had been drinking. She'd mentioned wanting to drive to her father's house for the weekend. Alexander had exploded, said she was choosing her washed-up military dad over him. When she tried to leave the apartment, he'd grabbed her arm. She'd pulled away. He'd shoved her into the kitchen counter. When she'd screamed at him to stop, he'd punched her in the ribs. 3 times. Hard enough that she'd collapsed, unable to breathe. Christy had called 911. Detective Morris had written it all down. Then she closed her notebook and looked at Wade with that same tired expression the ER doctor had worn. "Mr. Doyle, I'm going to be straight with you. This case is going to the DA's office. They'll review it. But the Booker family, they have resources. Good lawyers. They'll argue it was mutual combat, that Victoria pushed him first, that he was defending himself. Without independent witnesses. Her roommate heard everything. Heard, not saw. And Miss Holman only saw the aftermath. A defense attorney will tear that apart." Detective Morris had paused. "I'm not saying we won't try. I'm saying prepare yourself for disappointment." She'd been right. The district attorney's office had reviewed the case for 2 weeks. Then Kurt Hooper, an attorney from Blackwell and Associates, the most expensive law firm in Nashville, had appeared with affidavits. Alexander Booker had witnesses placing him at a bar until midnight. Victoria had texted him to come over. She'd been emotionally unstable lately. Several character witnesses, including friends Alexander had paid well, attested to this. The medical evidence was consistent with a fall, perhaps during an argument where both parties were physical. Mr. Booker was willing to attend anger management counseling and pay for Victoria's medical bills as a gesture of goodwill, despite being the real victim of defamation. The DA had called Wade personally. "Mr. Doyle, I'm sorry. Without more evidence, without witnesses who actually saw the assault, we can't proceed. It becomes he said, she said, and the Bookers have enough money to make this trial last year's and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even if we won, which is unlikely, Alexander would get probation at most. First offense, good family, expensive lawyers. The system isn't fair, but that's the reality." Wade had hung up without responding. The day Victoria was discharged, Wade had driven her back to his house instead of her apartment. She hadn't argued. She'd spent the drive staring out the window, one arm wrapped around her bruised ribs, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "I should have seen it sooner," she'd finally whispered. "The way he'd get jealous. How he'd criticize everything. My clothes, my friends, my degree. He made me feel like I was lucky he even wanted me. Like I was the problem." She turned to look at Wade, her eyes hollow. "Why didn't I see it?" "Because predators are good at hiding what they are," Wade had said. "And you did nothing wrong. You trusted someone. That's not a weakness." But inside, Wade's rage had been building. Not the hot, explosive kind that led to bar fights and restraining orders. The cold, calculated kind he'd learned in 2 decades of teaching men how to hunt terrorists in mountains and deserts. The kind that planned, that waited, that struck with precision. He'd gotten Victoria settled in her old bedroom, the one she'd left 4 years ago for college. The walls still had posters from her high school years, bands Wade didn't recognize, movie stars she'd once obsessed over. It looked like a museum to a girl who no longer existed. The Victoria who'd left this room had been confident, bright, planning to become a nurse. The one who'd returned was a shell, flinching at loud noises, unable to sleep without nightmares. Wade had spent those first few days taking care of her, making meals she barely touched, sitting with her when the pain medication wore off, and she'd cry from more than just physical hurt. Listening to her talk about the relationship in fragments, how Alexander had been charming at first, how slowly the control had started, how by the end she'd been apologizing for things that weren't her fault, walking on eggshells, believing his version of reality. On the 4th day, Christy had driven up from Nashville to visit. Wade had made them lunch while the 2 young women sat on a back porch, their voices low. When Christy left, she'd stopped in the kitchen where Wade was washing dishes. "Thank you for taking care of her," Christy had said. "She needs this. Needs to be away from everything." She'd hesitated, then added, "Alexander's been telling people she's crazy, that she's stalking him. He's posting pictures on social media with new girls, acting like nothing happened. His friends are spreading rumors that Victoria made everything up because he wanted to break up with her. Wade had dried his hands slowly, carefully. Is he bothering you? He tried calling me once. I blocked him. But Mr. Doyle, Christie's voice had dropped. He's not sorry. He thinks he won. I heard from a friend who knows his crowd that he was bragging about putting Victoria in her place at some party. He's not even hiding it. He knows his family made the charges disappear, and he thinks he's untouchable. After Christie left, Wade had sat on the porch with Victoria. The evening was warm, crickets chirping in the growing darkness. Victoria had been wrapped in a blanket despite the heat, still unable to get warm since the hospital. Dad, she'd said quietly, I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You didn't drag me into anything. I'm your father. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. But your reputation, your career, if Alexander's family comes after you. I'm retired, sweetheart. My career is behind me, and my reputation survived 2 decades of classified operations. I think I can handle some rich kid and his lawyers. Wade had paused. Are you going to be okay? Victoria had been quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Christie told me what he's saying about me. That I'm crazy, that I made it all up. And people believe him, Dad, because his family is who they are, and I'm nobody. It doesn't matter that I'm the one who got hurt. It doesn't matter that he could have killed me. Money makes it all go away, and I just have to live with it, pretend it never happened. Wade had recognized that tone. It was the same one he'd heard from soldiers who'd survived ambushes, who'd watched friends die, who'd come back from war zones broken. Trauma mixed with helplessness, the realization that justice was a fairy tale told to children. No, Wade had said simply, you don't have to live with it. Victoria had looked at him, searching his face. What do you mean? I mean you heal. You get stronger. And you let me handle Alexander Booker. Dad, you can't. His family will destroy you. They have money, lawyers, connections. Money isn't everything, Victoria. And connections don't mean much when you're dealing with someone who spent 24 years teaching America's most dangerous men how to operate in hostile territory. Wade had kept his voice calm, gentle even. I'm not going to do anything stupid, but I'm also not going to let him think he won. That's not how this ends. The next morning, Alexander Booker had shown up at Wade's house. Wade had been in his workshop, a converted barn behind the main house where he kept his tools and equipment. Years of operating in austere environments had taught him to maintain his own gear, to improvise, to build what he needed. The workshop was organized with military precision. Pegboards hung with tools, labeled storage bins, a workbench that could have passed an inspection. He'd heard the car pull up, an expensive purr of German engineering. Through the workshop window, Wade had watched Alexander Booker step out of a silver BMW, wearing designer jeans and a polo shirt that probably cost more than Wade's monthly utility bill. Alexander was handsome in that generic wealthy way, strong jaw, styled hair, the physique of someone who paid for a personal trainer. He looked around Wade's property with obvious disdain, then walked to the front door and knocked. Wade had taken his time crossing the yard. He'd been wearing work clothes, old jeans, a faded army t-shirt, boots. At 56, he was still 6'2", still carrying the lean muscle of someone who'd never stopped training. His hair was gray now, cut short, and his face was weathered from years spent outside in every climate imaginable. He'd seen Alexander's eyes assess him, do the math, and come up with old man. Can I help you? Wade had asked, his voice neutral. You're Wade Doyle, Victoria's dad. Alexander's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never faced real consequences. We need to talk. I don't think we have anything to discuss. Actually, we do. Alexander had smiled, and there was something cruel in it. Your daughter is spreading lies about me. My family's lawyers made the criminal case go away, but she's still running her mouth to her friends, telling people I assaulted her. That's defamation, Mr. Doyle. My family could sue her for everything she's worth, which I know isn't much, but we'd rather handle this quietly. Wade had felt something shift inside him. A door closing, another one opening. Handle it how? Victoria signs a statement saying she made everything up. Says the injuries were from a fall, that she was upset we were breaking up and wanted to hurt me. She stops talking to anyone about what supposedly happened. In exchange, my family won't pursue legal action against her, and I'll even pay her medical bills. Everyone moves on. She didn't make anything up. You beat her badly enough to break 4 of her ribs. Alexander's smile had widened. According to who? Her? The roommate who only heard noise and didn't actually see anything? Please. I have 10 witnesses who will testify I was nowhere near that apartment when Victoria had her accident. The police already dropped it. The DA won't touch it. It's over, old man. Your daughter needs to accept reality. Wade had stood very still. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, though he hadn't known it until now. The moment when Alexander showed him exactly who he was, confirmed every suspicion, removed any doubt. And if she refuses? Wade had asked. Then things get ugly. My family has resources you can't imagine. We can make her life hell. Sue her, ruin her credit, make sure no hospital in this state will hire her when she graduates. We can bury you too if you keep pushing this. My father plays golf with judges, senators, people who matter. You're a retired military grunt living in the middle of nowhere. Nobody cares what you think happened. Alexander had stepped closer, and Wade had smelled expensive cologne mixed with entitlement. But I'm a reasonable guy. I loved Victoria, even if she couldn't appreciate what she had. So I'm offering a clean break. She signs the paper, admits she lied, and we all move on. Otherwise, he'd shrugged. Otherwise, she learns that actions have consequences. Actions do have consequences, Wade had agreed quietly. Good. So we understand each other. Alexander had pulled out his phone. I'll have my lawyer send over the statement. Your daughter has 48 hours to sign it. After that, the offer expires and we move to phase 2, which involves a lawsuit that will ruin what's left of her pathetic life. He'd started to turn away, then paused and looked back at Wade. The smile had turned into something darker. Oh, and Mr. Doyle? Between us? She deserved it. Victoria was a whiny, clingy bitch who couldn't take a joke. I did her a favor, showing her what happens when you disrespect someone. Next time, maybe she'll think twice before running her mouth. Alexander had let that hang in the air for a moment. So what are you going to do about it, old man? Hit me? My lawyers will own this property by next week. Threaten me? That's another crime. You're powerless. That's what you need to understand. In the real world, people like my family always win. People like you and your daughter, you lose. That's just how it is. Wade had said nothing, just stood there with his hands loose at his sides, his face expressionless. It was a look that several terror cell leaders had seen in their final moments, though they'd been too panicked to recognize it. Alexander mistook it for defeat. 48 hours, Alexander had repeated, then walked back to his BMW with the casual arrogance of someone who believed the world bent to his will. Wade had watched him drive away. Then he'd walked back to his workshop, pulled out a notebook, old school, paper and pen, nothing digital that could be hacked or subpoenaed, and began to write. At the top of the first page, he'd printed Alexander Booker III. Beneath it, he'd started a list. For 24 years, Wade Doyle had trained Delta Force operators in a very specific skill set. Not just shooting, though he was an expert marksman. Not just hand-to-hand combat, though he held black belts in 3 disciplines. Not just survival, though he could live off the land indefinitely in any environment. No, Wade's specialty had been something more psychological. He taught operators how to break enemies without leaving marks, how to apply pressure until even the strongest minds fractured, how to exploit fear, paranoia, weakness, how to make someone wish they'd never been born, and do it in ways that left no evidence, no trail, nothing that could ever be traced back. He'd trained men to be ghosts in hostile territory, to operate outside normal rules, outside normal limits, beyond the reach of conventional law or morality, to do what needed to be done in the dark places where America's enemies hid. Now Alexander Booker had made himself a target. He'd walked onto Wade's property, threatened his daughter, admitted his guilt, and revealed exactly what kind of monster he was. And he'd done it while standing in front of a man who knew 100 ways to destroy him. Wade filled 3 pages that night. Every page was a strategy, a contingency, a trap. He cross-referenced databases he still had access to from his military days, made phone calls to old friends who owed him favors, researched the Booker family business interests and personal lives. By dawn, he had a complete picture. Gerard Booker, Alexander's father, had built his real estate empire through aggressive tactics and questionable dealings. Several former business partners had filed suits claiming fraud, though all had settled quietly. Gerard's reputation was ruthless but clean, no convictions, no public scandals. Sharon Booker, the mother, was old Nashville society. Her family trust was worth $40 million, separate from her husband's income. She chaired charity galas, sat on museum boards, and appeared in society pages. She also, Wade discovered through some careful inquiry, had a serious prescription painkiller addiction that she hid behind designer clothes and plastic smiles. Taylor Booker, Alexander's younger brother, was 23 and currently attending law school at Vanderbilt. He'd been arrested twice for DUI, but both charges had been reduced to reckless driving. There were also sealed juvenile records that Wade couldn't access, but the pattern was clear. This family believed laws applied to other people. But it was Alexander's history that gave Wade the most ammunition. Once he started digging deeper, connecting with old Army intelligence contacts who could access records civilians couldn't, he found a pattern. 3 previous girlfriends before Victoria. One had filed a restraining order in college that had been mysteriously withdrawn. Another had transferred schools mid-semester after an incident at a party. The third, a girl named Michelle, had ended up hospitalized with injuries she claimed came from falling downstairs. Each time, the Booker family lawyers had made it disappear. Each time, Alexander had walked away clean. Victoria wasn't his first victim. She was just the latest. Wade studied the information like he was planning a mission deep in enemy territory. Because that's exactly what this was, a mission. The objective, destroy Alexander Booker and his family's ability to harm anyone else. The constraints, do it in a way that couldn't be traced, that wouldn't blow back on Victoria, that would make them suffer as much as possible before the end. The timeline started immediately. On the second day after Alexander's visit, Wade drove to Nashville. He didn't tell Victoria where he was going, just said he had errands. He'd learned long ago that plausible deniability was a gift. The less she knew, the less she could be implicated. His first stop was a coffee shop near Vanderbilt's campus. Wade had called ahead, and Leon Horton was already waiting in a corner booth. Leon was one of Wade's former students, a Delta operator who'd retired 5 years ago after a mission in Syria went bad and left him with a permanent limp. They'd stayed in touch. Brothers in arms rarely drifted apart completely. Leon had greeted him, standing to shake hands. He was in his early 40s, still carrying himself like a soldier despite the injury. His eyes were sharp, assessing. Your message said this was personal. It is. Wade had sat down and laid out the situation. Everything. Victoria's injuries, the legal system's failure, Alexander's visit, his threats. Leon's expression had darkened as he listened. When Wade finished, Leon had been quiet for a moment. Then what do you need? Information. Surveillance. Maybe some specialized equipment. Depends on how far this goes. How far do you want it to go? Wade had met his old friend's eyes. Leon would understand. They'd both operated in places where the usual rules didn't apply, where justice was whatever you made it. As far as it needs to, this kid thinks he's untouchable. I need to teach him what it feels like to be prey instead of predator. Leon had nodded slowly. I know a guy who does private investigation, very discreet. Former agency. He owes me. I can have him tail Booker, find out his patterns, who he associates with, where he goes. See if there's anything his family doesn't know about. Perfect. Tell him to keep it quiet. I don't want anyone knowing this is connected to me or Victoria. What about physical surveillance? Cameras, listening devices? Eventually. First, I need to understand his world. Map the territory. Then we can start operations. They'd talk for another hour, falling back into the familiar rhythm of mission planning. It felt natural, comfortable. This was what Wade had done for 2 decades. Identified targets, gathered intelligence, planned actions. The fact that the target was an American civilian on American soil was technically different, but the principles remained the same. When they parted ways, Leon had gripped Wade's shoulder. Be careful. These rich families, they play a different game. Money buys things we never dealt with in our world. Money can't buy everything, Wade had said. Fear is free. His second stop was a meeting with someone from his even more distant past, a former CIA contractor named Kurt, who specialized in digital surveillance and cyber intrusion. They met in a parking garage, anonymous and quick. Kurt listened to Wade's requirements and named a price. Wade paid in cash. Within a week, he'd have access to Alexander Booker's phone records, social media accounts, emails, and GPS location history. This is illegal, you know, Kurt had mentioned casually. So, is beating a woman until you break her ribs, Wade had replied. Kurt had shrugged. Fair point. But if anyone asks, we never met. By the time Wade drove back to his house, the first phase was in motion. He'd set up a secure email account with encryption, created a file structure for the intelligence he'd gather, and established a communication protocol with Leon. Everything compartmentalized, everything deniable. Victoria was on the porch when he got home, wrapped in her blanket again, staring at nothing. She looked up when Wade's truck pulled in. Where were you? She asked. Running errands. How are you feeling? Same. Hurts to breathe still. The doctor said it might be weeks before the ribs fully heal. She paused. Alexander's lawyer called me. They sent an email with some statement they want me to sign. Did you see it? I did. You're not signing anything. Dad, they said they'll sue me if I don't. But they'll ruin my life. That, Victoria. Wade had sat down beside her, taken her hand gently. Do you trust me? She'd looked at him, really looked, and seen something in his face she hadn't seen before. Or maybe she had seen it, but never recognized it for what it was. The expression of a man who'd spent 2 decades learning how to hunt human beings in the dark. Yes, she'd whispered. I trust you. Then trust me when I say Alexander Booker is not going to hurt you again. Not with lawyers, not with threats, not with anything. His family thinks they're powerful. They think money makes them safe. They're wrong. Now go inside, rest. Don't answer any calls from them. Let me handle this. She'd nodded and gone inside, still uncertain but relieved to surrender the burden. Wade had sat on the porch as the sun set, his mind already working through the next steps. Alexander had made a critical error when he'd shown up at Wade's house. He'd given Wade his measure, arrogant, cruel, stupid. He'd revealed that he felt invincible, which meant he'd be careless. And most importantly, he'd threatened the only thing in the world Wade loved more than his own life. That made him not just a target. It made him a dead man walking. The intelligence started flowing in within days. Leon's investigator was thorough. He documented Alexander's routines, the gym he attended every morning at 6, the exclusive club where he had lunch 3 times a week, the bars where he picked up women, the apartment where he lived alone in a high-rise downtown. Photographs, time-stamped and detailed. A schedule Wade could set his watch by. Kurt's digital intrusion provided even better material. Alexander's text messages were a goldmine of self-incrimination. There were conversations with his brother Taylor about that bitch Victoria and how they dodged a bullet with the legal case. Messages to friends joking about the situation, using language so vile Wade had to set his jaw to keep from putting his fist through the screen. Pictures Alexander had taken of Victoria when she was sleeping, vulnerable, that he'd shared with friends for laughs. But it was the emails between Alexander and his father that revealed the real rot. Gerard Booker had written, I've paid off 3 of your disasters now, Alexander. This needs to stop. You're becoming a liability. The lawyer fees alone are ridiculous, and if any of these girls went to the press, it would ruin everything I've built. Alexander's response, relax, old man. They never do. These types are too ashamed or too poor to fight back. Victoria is already backing down. Her loser dad is powerless. Everything's fine. Gerard's reply, it better be, because I'm not bailing you out again. Next time, you deal with the consequences yourself. Wade had printed that exchange and added it to his growing file. It confirmed what he'd suspected. Gerard Booker knew his son was a monster, and he'd been enabling him for years. The entire family was complicit. That meant the entire family was fair game. Wade began phase 2 on a Thursday morning. Alexander Booker left his apartment at 5:45 a.m., like clockwork, for his gym session. Wade was waiting in a rental car, untraceable to him, parked in a spot with clear line of sight to Alexander's BMW. When Alexander emerged 90 minutes later, showered and dressed in business casual, Wade followed him at a distance. The tale led to a coffee shop, then to an office building where the Booker family business operated. Alexander spent 4 hours there, doing whatever it was rich kids did when they pretended to work for their father's companies. Then lunch at an upscale restaurant where he met 3 other young men from similar backgrounds. They laughed, drank expensive wine, and from the body language Wade could see through the window, they were utterly unconcerned with anything resembling consequences. After lunch, Alexander went to a luxury car dealership. Wade watched him test drive a new Mercedes, flirt with the saleswoman, and eventually write a check for the purchase. The arrogance was breathtaking. Less than 2 weeks after putting Victoria in the hospital, Alexander was buying toys. Wade took photographs of everything. Not for evidence. This wasn't about building a legal case. The legal system had already failed. These photographs were for something else entirely. That night, Phase 2 began in earnest. Alexander returned to his apartment around 7 p.m. Wade, positioned across the street with night vision binoculars, watched him order takeout, eat in front of his television, then settle in with his laptop. At 9:47 p.m., Alexander's phone rang. Wade watched him answer, saw his expression change from casual to confused to angry. The call had come from an untraceable number. The voice, electronically distorted, courtesy of equipment Leon had provided, had delivered a simple message. Michelle Brennan. Jessica Torres. Sarah Kim. Victoria Doyle. We know what you did to all of them. Did you think it would stay buried forever? Alexander had hung up immediately. Wade watched him pace his apartment, clearly rattled. He made a phone call to his father based on the length and his gesticulations. When he hung up, Alexander checked his locks, looked out his windows nervously, then closed all his blinds. Wade had smiled. The seed was planted. Fear took root slowly, but it grew fast once established. The next day, Alexander received an envelope at his office. Plain manila, no return address, delivered by a courier service that couldn't trace who'd hired them. Inside were 3 photographs, Michelle Brennan's hospital records from 6 years ago, showing injuries consistent with assault. Jessica Torres' statement to her university police about an incident at a fraternity party. Sarah Kim's emergency room intake form. In a single typed sentence. Truth has a way of surfacing. People are starting to ask questions. Alexander had taken that envelope straight to his father's office. Wade knew because Leon's investigator had a contact inside the Booker building, a cleaning service employee who was happy to share what she overheard for the right price. She reported that Alexander and Gerard had a shouting match that afternoon. Gerard furious that Alexander had been lying about the extent of his problems, Alexander defensive and demanding his father fix it. The pressure was building. Wade let it simmer for 3 days, giving Alexander time to become paranoid, to jump at shadows, to wonder who was behind the messages and photographs. In that time, Alexander hired private security, a former police officer who now followed him around like a shadow. He varied his routines, stopped going to his regular haunts, looked over his shoulder constantly. Wade watched it all with satisfaction. This was what he'd taught operators to do to enemy insurgents, psychological pressure, making them feel exposed, hunted. The human mind wasn't built to sustain constant vigilance. Eventually, it cracked. But Wade wasn't done, not even close. On day 4, every member of the Booker family received an identical envelope. Gerard at his office, Sharon at her country club luncheon, Taylor at his law school, Alexander at his apartment. Each envelope contained the same materials, a dossier on Alexander's history of violence against women, complete with medical records, statements, photographs, and a cover letter written in clinical language. The pattern is clear. Alexander Booker III is a serial abuser who has used family wealth and legal manipulation to avoid consequences. The following documentation represents just 4 confirmed victims. How many others are there? How long will his family continue enabling his violence? These materials are being compiled for distribution to local media outlets who have expressed interest in investigating the preferential treatment wealthy offenders receive in the criminal justice system. The letter wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Gerard Booker immediately called an emergency meeting with his lawyers. Sharon, according to Wade's sources, had a nervous breakdown and had to be sedated. Taylor tried to call Alexander 17 times that day. Wade knew because Kurt was monitoring all their phone records. Alexander, for his part, barricaded himself in his apartment. His new security guard stood outside, and Alexander began making frantic calls to his lawyer, to his friends, to private investigators, trying to figure out who was targeting him. He never once considered it might be the powerless old man he'd threatened. Wade gave them 2 days to panic. Then he escalated. Alexander's BMW, parked in the secure garage beneath his building, was found with all 4 tires slashed. The security cameras in the garage mysteriously malfunctioned for exactly the 7-minute window when it happened. The building's management couldn't explain it. The next night, Alexander's credit cards were all maxed out with charges from various online retailers. Charges that were later reversed, but not before causing hours of chaos and phone calls. His bank accounts were temporarily frozen due to suspicious activity that triggered fraud alerts. His social media accounts were hacked and filled with posts confessing to assaulting Victoria, apologizing to his previous victims, and admitting his family had paid to make everything disappear. The posts were up for 40 minutes before Alexander's team could take them down, long enough for hundreds of people to screenshot them for the post to start spreading. Alexander's lawyer, Kurt Hooper, called an emergency meeting with the family. They gathered at the Booker Mansion, a colonial revival monstrosity in Belle Meade, where Gerard laid down the law. Alexander needed to disappear for a while. Go to the family property in Colorado, stay out of sight, let the lawyers handle damage control. They'd threatened to sue anyone who spread the social media posts, claim they were fake, deep fakes, whatever they needed to say. But Alexander needed to be invisible until this blew over. Who was doing this? Sharon had demanded, her voice shrill. Who would go to these lengths? Gerard, showing the cold calculation that had built his empire, had said exactly what Wade wanted him to say. It doesn't matter. Someone is playing games. Maybe a competitor trying to damage our reputation. Maybe one of the girls hired someone. Either way, we weather the storm, we sue anyone who steps out of line, and we make this go away like we always do. They still didn't understand. They thought this was about money, reputation, business. They thought it could be managed, papered over, bought off. They had no idea this was about retribution. Alexander refused to go to Colorado. He was angry now, cornered, and like most bullies when confronted, he defaulted to aggression. He wanted to fight back, wanted his father to use their resources to destroy whoever was targeting him. He ranted about how the family looked weak, how they were letting some unknown enemy dictate terms. I'm not running, Alexander had told his father. I'm not hiding. Whoever this is, we find them and we bury them. That's what we do. That's what you always taught me. Never show weakness. Gerard, exhausted and furious, had finally agreed. They'd hired a top-tier security firm, put investigators on retainer, and prepare to go on the offensive. That's when Wade had been waiting for, because predators, when frightened, always made the same mistake. They attacked, and Wade had prepared the perfect trap. The security firm Gerard hired was called Sentinel Solutions, an expensive outfit that specialized in corporate espionage and executive protection. They were good, former Secret Service, FBI, military. They started with Alexander's apartment, swept it for bugs, found none because Wade hadn't planted any. They analyzed the social media hack, traced it to a series of VPN servers bouncing through 6 countries, dead ends. They interviewed Alexander about enemies, grudges, anyone who might target him. Alexander had given them a list of business competitors his father had crushed, romantic rivals, former friends who'd had falling outs. But he never mentioned Victoria. Why would he? In his mind, she was a non-entity, powerless, already dealt with. Sentinel Solutions built a profile. Sophisticated attacker, likely professional, motivated by either financial gain or personal vendetta. They advised the Bookers to increase security, monitor communications, and wait for the attacker to make a mistake. Wade had known they'd come to those conclusions. He designed his operation to lead them there. Because while Sentinel Solutions was looking for a professional criminal or corporate spy, Wade was preparing the next phase, one they'd never see coming. It started with Taylor Booker, the younger brother. Wade had identified him as the weak link. Where Alexander was arrogant and aggressive, Taylor was anxious and eager to please. He wanted to be like his father and brother, ruthless, powerful, but he lacked the core sociopathy required. He was a follower, not a leader, which made him the perfect pressure point. Taylor's law school routine was even more predictable than Alexander's. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he attended classes from 9 to 3, then went to the law library to study until 7. He walked the same route every time, usually alone, lost in his headphones and phone. On a Thursday evening, as Taylor left the library and cut through the mostly empty campus parking lot, he found an envelope on his car windshield. Inside was a single photograph. Him from 3 years ago at a party, obviously drunk, his arm around a girl who looked unconscious. And a note, sealed juvenile records aren't as sealed as you think. What happened that night? What did your family pay to make disappear? Taylor had looked around the parking lot, spooked. No one was watching, at least no one he could see. Wade was positioned 200 yards away with a spotting scope, observing. Taylor had gotten in his car, with shaking hands, and driven home. The next day, Taylor received a text from an unknown number. Your brother ruins lives. Your parents enable him. What does that make you? An accomplice? Or just a coward? Taylor showed the text to Alexander, who told him to ignore it, that it was just part of the harassment campaign. But Wade could see it working. Taylor wasn't built for this kind of pressure. His anxiety was visible in every movement. The way he checked over his shoulder, the calls he made to his parents, the way he jumped at sudden noises. Wade kept the pressure on Taylor for a week. More messages, more photographs from his past, more questions designed to make him doubt himself, his family, his choices. Nothing threatening, nothing actionable, just a constant drip of psychological stress. And then Wade gave Taylor an out. The message came on a Friday night. You're not like them. You can make this stop. Tell the truth about what Alexander did. Tell the truth about Victoria Doyle. Make your family face justice, and this ends. Keep protecting a monster, and it gets worse. You have 48 hours to decide. Taylor had a breakdown. He called his father crying, told him about the messages, the photographs, the accusations. Gerard, now genuinely worried that the situation was spiraling beyond control, called another family meeting. That meeting, which took place at the Booker mansion on Saturday morning, was where everything changed. Because Wade had been counting on Gerard's paranoia, on the family's tendency to close ranks and suspect outsiders. What he hadn't anticipated was Sharon Booker finally breaking. According to Leon's source, the investigator had managed to place a long-range listening device near the mansion. Sharon had stood up in the middle of Gerard's planning session and screamed, "This is your fault. Both of you." She'd pointed at Gerard and Alexander. "I told you years ago Alexander needed help. Real help, not just lawyers cleaning up his messes. But you told me to stay quiet to protect the family name. Now look what's happening. Someone knows everything, and they're going to destroy us." "Calm down," Gerard had ordered. "We're handling it." "You're not handling anything. You're making it worse." Sharon had been nearly hysterical. "That poor girl Victoria, I saw the hospital photos Alexander's lawyer showed us. He could have killed her, and you just paid people off like it was nothing. Like she was nothing." "She is nothing," Alexander had snapped. "She's a nobody from nowhere, and if she or her loser father think they can." That's when Sharon had slapped him, hard enough that the sound carried over the listening device. Don't you dare speak about her like that after what you did." The room had gone silent. Taylor had been crying. Gerard had been furious. And Alexander had looked at his mother with something close to hatred. Sharon had left the room. She'd gone upstairs, and based on what happened next, she'd made a decision. She'd called Detective Morris. Wade found out about the call 2 hours later when Leon's contacts in Nashville PD mentioned that Sharon Booker had walked into the station and asked to speak with the detective about her son's assault case. She brought her own lawyer, not the family's usual firm, but someone independent, and she'd given a statement. Sharon admitted that Alexander had told her what really happened with Victoria, that he'd been drunk and angry, that he'd hit her repeatedly, that he'd only called his father's lawyers when he realized Victoria might die. Sharon provided text messages between herself and Alexander where he joked about teaching Victoria a lesson. She provided phone records showing calls between Gerard and the family lawyers in the hours after the assault, before Alexander was even questioned by police. It was enough to reopen the case. Not enough to guarantee a conviction. The family could still argue Sharon was coerced or lying, but enough to bring the prosecutor back to the table. Detective Morris called Wade that evening. "Mr. Doyle, I don't know what you did or how you did it, but Sharon Booker just handed us everything we needed. We're bringing charges against Alexander. Aggravated assault, witness intimidation, and we're looking at the father for obstruction of justice. I wanted you to know before it goes public." Wade had thanked her calmly, then hung up and allowed himself a small smile. The trap was working perfectly. He'd pushed the family until their own dysfunction tore them apart. Sharon's guilt and fear had overwhelmed her loyalty. She'd become the weapon Wade needed. But this wasn't over. Charges were just the beginning. Alexander would still have expensive lawyers. Gerard would still fight. The family could still drag this out for years, could still potentially win. Wade needed to make sure they couldn't. The next phase was more direct, more physical, more in line with what he'd taught Delta operators to do in the field when psychological warfare wasn't enough. Alexander, now facing criminal charges and a mother who'd turned on him, had retreated to a friend's lake house outside of Nashville. His security team went with him, but they were focused on external threats, other people, investigators, protesters. They weren't expecting what came next. Wade had spent 3 nights conducting reconnaissance on the lake house. It sat on 40 acres, private and isolated, accessible only by a long gravel driveway. The security team consisted of 2 men working 12-hour shifts. They were competent, but not exceptional. They'd gotten soft working corporate jobs, protecting executives from process servers and angry shareholders. They'd never trained for someone like Wade. On the 4th night, Wade moved in. He'd parked his vehicle 2 miles away and approached through the woods on foot, using night vision and terrain masking techniques he could execute in his sleep. By 2 a.m., he was positioned 50 yards from the house, invisible in the darkness, watching the security guards' patrol pattern. It took 90 minutes to circumvent the basic alarm system, not by disabling it, but by understanding its blind spots. Every system had them. Then Wade was inside a ground floor window, moving through the dark house with the silence of a ghost. Alexander was asleep in a second-floor bedroom. The security guard was downstairs in the living room, monitoring cameras that showed the exterior but nothing inside. Wade climbed the stairs, each step measure controlled. In Alexander's room, Wade stood at the foot of the bed for a full minute, just watching. This was the man who'd beaten his daughter, the man who'd threatened him, the man who'd ruined lives without remorse. The man who was about to learn what real fear felt like. Wade had brought a small syringe filled with a sedative. Not enough to be dangerous, just enough to keep Alexander groggy and compliant. He'd also brought zip ties, duct tape, and a few other tools. But he didn't use any of them. Instead, Wade simply turned on the bedroom light. Alexander had woken instantly, disoriented and confused. He'd seen Wade standing there, dressed in black, face obscured by a balaclava, holding nothing more threatening than a photograph. And his first response had been a shout for his security guard. "He can't hear you," Wade had said quietly, his voice electronically distorted by a small device. "This room is soundproofed. Did you know that? The previous owner wanted privacy. Lucky for us." Alexander had scrambled back against the headboard. "Who are you? What do you want?" Wade had held up the photograph. It showed Victoria in her hospital bed, tubes and monitors, bruises visible even under the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Remember her?" Alexander's eyes had widened. Recognition, then calculation. You're working for her father? That psycho who's been harassing my family." "I don't work for anyone." Wade had stepped closer. "I'm just someone who knows what you are. A coward who hurts women because he thinks money makes him untouchable. Your mother confirmed it. The police know. Your lawyers can't save you now. My father will destroy you. Do you have any idea who we are?" "I know exactly who you are. That's why I'm here." Wade had pulled out his phone and showed Alexander a video, Footage from the hospital security camera, showing Alexander leaving Victoria's apartment building the night of the assault, timestamps clear and undeniable. Your lawyers claimed you were never there. This says different. So does the testimony of 3 neighbors who heard the screaming. So do the medical records. You're going to prison, Alexander. No, we'll win. We always win. My father. Your father is going down for obstruction. Your mother is cooperating with prosecutors to save herself. Taylor is negotiating immunity. Your family is eating itself alive. You have no one left. Wade had leaned in close. And even if you somehow beat the charges, even if you walk away free, you'll never be safe again. Because I know where you are. Always. And one day, when you least expect it, I'll be back. Maybe it's tomorrow. Maybe it's 5 years from now. But you'll never stop looking over your shoulder. You'll never stop wondering if tonight is the night someone comes through your window. That's what you gave my daughter, permanent fear. Now it's yours to carry. Alexander had been shaking. You can't do this. I'll tell the police you broke in. I'll tell them what? That someone turned on your light and talked to you? There's no evidence I was ever here. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. Just like there was no evidence when you beat Victoria, right? The difference is, I'm better at this than you. I've been doing it for 24 years. You're an amateur playing in the professional leagues. And you're going to lose. Wade had taken one last photograph. Alexander in bed, terrified, looking at the camera with pure fear in his eyes. Then he turned off the light and disappeared back into the darkness. Out the window, through the woods, gone before Alexander's security guard even realized anything had happened. By the time Alexander convinced the guard to check the room, there was nothing to find. No evidence of entry. No trace of Wade's presence. Just Alexander's panicked story about an intruder, which the guard checked and found impossible given the intact alarms and locked windows. Alexander hadn't slept the rest of the night. By morning, he was back in Nashville, demanding his father hire more security, install better systems, do something. But the damage was done. The psychological toll was visible. Dark circles under his eyes, jumping at every sound, paranoid and unraveling. And Wade had documented all of it. The photographs he'd taken, the videos, the audio recordings, they all went into his file. Not as evidence for court, as insurance, as leverage, as ammunition for the final phase. The criminal trial moved forward quickly once Sharon's testimony was added to the case. The district attorney, sensing blood in the water and good publicity, charged Alexander with aggravated assault, witness intimidation, and several lesser charges. Gerard Booker was charged with obstruction of justice for his role in contacting witnesses and paying them to change statements. Taylor received immunity for cooperating. Kurt Hooper, the family's lawyer, had tried to negotiate a plea deal. Alexander would plead guilty to simple assault, serve 6 months with credit for time served, pay restitution. The DA refused. This case had become too public, too symbolic. Rich kid gets away with beating his girlfriend? Not this time. The trial was set for 3 months away. In that time, Alexander became a ghost. He stayed in his apartment, barely left, hired a full-time security detail. His social media went dark. His friends stopped associating with him. The Booker family name, once synonymous with power and influence, became toxic. Gerard's business suffered as partners distanced themselves. Board positions were quietly rescinded. Country club memberships were re-evaluated. Old money families circled the wagons and cut the Bookers loose to protect themselves. Sharon entered an intensive rehabilitation program for her prescription drug addiction. Taylor transferred to a law school in another state, desperate to escape the family scandal. And Victoria was healing. Wade had told her about Sharon's cooperation, about the charges, about Alexander facing real consequences. She'd cried, but this time from relief, from validation, from knowing that someone had believed her, had fought for her, had made the system work even when it had failed her. She didn't ask Wade what he'd done. Some part of her knew, or suspected, but she didn't want confirmation. That was fine. Wade had learned long ago that sometimes the most loving thing you could do for someone was shield them from the dark work that happened in their name. But Wade's plan wasn't finished. Because Alexander, even facing trial, even beaten down and paranoid, still had his father's money, still had the possibility of appeal, of hung juries, of legal technicalities. And Wade had made a promise to himself. Alexander Booker would never hurt anyone again. That required one final operation. 2 weeks before the trial, Alexander's lawyer received a package. Inside was a flash drive containing the complete file Wade had compiled, every piece of evidence about Alexander's previous victims, every text message, every photograph, every medical record. Plus new material, audio recordings of Alexander bragging to friends about assaulting women, video of him following women who'd rejected him, documentation of stalking behaviors, drug use, financial crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. More importantly, it was all legally obtained. Wade had been careful about that. No illegal wiretaps, no stolen documents. Everything had come from legitimate sources. Public records, social media, information provided voluntarily by victims who'd finally found someone who believed them. The lawyer had immediately taken the drive to Gerard. They'd watched it together, seen the full scope of Alexander's crimes laid out with prosecutorial precision. And they'd realized the truth. If this went to trial, if any of this new evidence came out, Alexander wasn't getting 6 months. He was facing decades. Gerard had called an emergency meeting. Alexander, Kurt Hooper, Sharon, and the rest of the legal team. They'd reviewed the evidence. Kurt had been blunt. This is over. If we go to trial with this hanging over us, you're looking at 20 years minimum. Maybe more. And this stuff about the previous victims? That's multiple charges. Multiple trials. This could be the rest of your life. So what do I do? Alexander had asked. And for the first time, he'd sounded genuinely afraid. Not angry, not defiant, just scared. You take the deal, Kurt had said. I'll go back to the DA. We offer a guilty plea to aggravated assault, no trial. You accept 10 years, serve at least 6 before parole eligibility. You make a public statement taking full responsibility. You pay restitution to all victims. And in exchange, they don't pursue charges related to the other cases, and this new evidence stays buried. 10 years. Alexander had looked at his father, desperate for rescue. But Gerard had just shaken his head. Do it. We can't win this. Cut your losses. Sharon, to her credit, had said nothing. She'd stopped trying to save her son. She was focused on saving herself. Alexander had taken the deal 2 days later. In a closed courtroom session, he'd pled guilty to aggravated assault against Victoria Doyle. The judge had sentenced him to 10 years in state prison, with 6 years minimum before parole consideration. Alexander would also pay $500,000 in restitution to Victoria and complete domestic violence counseling. Gerard Booker pled guilty to obstruction charges and received 3 years probation, substantial fines, and was barred from serving on corporate boards. His business empire didn't collapse, but it was permanently damaged. The Booker family's fall from grace was complete. They'd gone from Nashville royalty to cautionary tale in under 3 months. But that still wasn't enough for Wade, because Alexander would eventually get out of prison. 6 years, maybe 8 with good behavior, and he'd be free again. Still young, still dangerous, still carrying the arrogance and entitlement that made him believe he deserved to hurt people. So Wade had added one more element to his plan. One final piece of insurance that Alexander would never see coming. Wade had used his contacts to ensure Alexander was placed in a specific facility, a medium-security prison known for its gang population and violent incidents. Not the country club minimum security facility Gerard's lawyers had requested. And Wade had made sure certain inmates knew exactly who Alexander Booker was and what he'd done. Prison had its own justice system, its own rules. Men who hurt women, who beat them, who showed no remorse. They weren't looked upon kindly. Even among criminals, there were lines he didn't cross. Alexander lasted 3 months before the first assault. A broken nose in the shower. Then a month later, cracked ribs in the yard. The guards investigated, found nothing, no witnesses. Alexander requested protective custody. It was denied, overcrowding, they said. Budget issues. 6 months into his sentence, Alexander was attacked by 3 inmates who'd learned about his history. He spent 2 weeks in the prison hospital with a fractured skull, broken jaw, internal injuries. When he recovered, he begged his father to get him transferred. Gerard tried, pulled every string he had left, but the state corrections system was unmoved. Alexander had been classified as medium security. That's where he'd stay. Wade received updates from Leon, whose contacts in the prison system kept him informed. Each report confirmed what Wade had orchestrated. Alexander was living the same fear he'd inflicted on Victoria, every day wondering if today was the day someone came for him. Unable to sleep, unable to feel safe, trapped in a nightmare of his own making. It was justice, not the kind that came from courtrooms and judges, but the kind that actually balanced the scales. 3 years after Alexander entered prison, Wade received a phone call. Kurt Hooper, Alexander's lawyer, the same man who'd made Victoria's criminal case disappear, who'd defended the Booker family's crimes for years. Mr. Doyle, Kurt had said, his voice tight. I'm calling on behalf of the Booker family. We need to speak with you. In person. About ending this. Please. They're willing to discuss any terms you want. Wade had agreed to meet. Not because he was done. He'd never be done, but because he wanted to see it. Wanted to witness the moment when people who'd believed themselves untouchable finally understood they'd been broken. They'd met at a coffee shop, neutral ground. Kurt had arrived with Gerard Booker, who looked 10 years older than the last time Wade had seen him. The stress had carved lines in his face, turned his hair white. He was no longer the powerful real estate mogul. He was just a tired man watching his family disintegrate. Mr. Doyle, Gerard had started, his voice hoarse. I'm here to beg you. Please, whatever you want, it's yours. Money, property, anything. Just make it stop. Make what stop. Wade had asked calmly. You know what? The incidents in prison. Alexander being targeted. We know you're behind it. I don't know how. I don't know who you're paying, but I know it's you. You're the only one who could coordinate this. Wade had sipped his coffee. Your son is in a violent prison. Violent things happen. That's not my fault. He's been beaten 4 times. Stabbed once. He's been in medical more than general population. The guards do nothing. Other inmates target him specifically. That's not random. That's orchestrated. Gerard had leaned forward. I know what you are. I had investigators look into you. 24 years training Delta Force. You know people. Dangerous people. You're using them to torture my son. Your son tortured my daughter. He broke her ribs. He made her feel worthless. He threatened her and me. And he did it to at least 3 other women before Victoria. The legal system gave him 10 years. Prison is just giving him the same treatment he gave others. Seems fair to me. Please. Gerard's voice had broken. He's my son. Whatever he did, however wrong he was, he's still my child. I'm begging you to show mercy. Wade had looked at this man, this powerful, wealthy man who'd once seemed untouchable, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Where was your mercy when Victoria was in the hospital? Where was your humanity when you paid lawyers to make her suffering disappear? You enabled a monster. You protected him. You taught him that violence had no consequences as long as you had money. Now, he's learning you were wrong. What do you want? Kurt had interjected. Name your price. We'll pay anything. I don't want your money. I want Alexander to serve every day of his sentence. I want him to feel afraid every morning he wakes up. I want him to understand what it's like to be prey instead of predator. And when he gets out, if he survives to get out, I want him to spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. That's my price. That's what justice looks like. Gerard had stared at him. You're going to let him be killed. I'm not letting anything happen. I'm just not stopping it. There's a difference. You're a monster, Gerard had whispered. Wade had leaned forward. No, I'm what monsters create when they hurt the wrong person's family. You should have thought about that before you taught your son that violence was acceptable. You should have stopped him after the first girl, or the second, or the third. But you didn't. You protected him. So now he faces the consequences. And so do you. He'd stood up to leave, but Kurt had grabbed his arm. Wait, what if Alexander made a public confession, named every girl he hurt, apologized publicly, admitted everything? What if we created a foundation in Victoria's name, funded it with millions, dedicated to helping domestic violence survivors. What if we did everything possible to make amends? Would that be enough? Wade had considered it. Not because he cared about their money or their public relations campaign, but because Victoria deserved more than just revenge. She deserved acknowledgement. She deserved the world to know she'd told the truth. I'll discuss it with Victoria, Wade had said. If she wants Alexander to make a statement, if she wants your blood money for a foundation, that's her choice. But the prison situation? That's not negotiable. Alexander serves his time, takes his chances like every other inmate. If he survives, good for him. If not, Wade had shrugged. He made his choices. Now he lives with them. Or doesn't. He'd left Gerard and Kurt sitting there, defeated and helpless. On the drive home, Wade had called Victoria. He'd explained the offer, asked her what she wanted. Victoria had been quiet for a long time. Then she'd said, I want him to apologize. On camera. I want him to name every woman he hurt and admit what he did. And I want that foundation. Not for me. I don't need their money. But for other women who might not have a father like you to fight for them. They deserve help. They deserve resources. If the Bookers want to fund that, fine. That's their penance. An Alexander situation in prison. Another long pause. Dad, I'm not going to tell you to keep hurting him. That's not who I am. But I'm also not going to ask you to stop. He made his choices. Whatever happens to him now, that's on him. I'm at peace with it. I'm healing. That's enough for me. Wade had felt a surge of pride. His daughter had survived hell and come out stronger. She wasn't consumed by hatred or revenge. She was choosing to move forward, to help others, to turn her trauma into purpose. That was real strength. 2 weeks later, Alexander Booker released a video statement from prison. Thin, bruised, barely recognizable as the arrogant young man who'd threatened Wade in his driveway, Alexander had read from a prepared statement. I am guilty of assaulting Victoria Doyle. I broke her ribs, I terrorized her, I used my family's wealth to avoid responsibility. But Victoria wasn't my only victim. I hurt Michelle Brennan, Jessica Torres, and Sarah Kim. I hurt others whose names I don't even remember. I was a predator. I am a predator. I deserve everything that's happened to me. I'm sorry to every woman I hurt. I'm sorry to their families. I'm sorry I didn't face justice sooner. The Booker family is establishing a foundation to help domestic violence survivors because we caused so much harm. It doesn't fix what I did. Nothing can. But maybe it helps someone else. I hope so. I deserve to be in here. I deserve worse. The video went viral. It was shared millions of times. Advocacy groups praised it as unprecedented accountability from a wealthy abuser. The Booker Foundation was established with an initial endowment of $15 million, with Victoria named as an advisory board member. And Alexander remained in prison, serving his sentence, surviving each day, but never truly safe. Wade continued his life in Tennessee. Victoria finished her nursing degree and started working at a hospital, specializing in emergency care for trauma victims. She was good at it, gentle, understanding, able to see past the injuries to the person beneath. Her experience had made her uniquely qualified to help others who'd survived violence. She also started speaking at domestic violence awareness events, sharing her story, encouraging other victims to come forward. She became a voice for those who'd been silenced. The foundation grew, helping hundreds of women escape abusive situations, funding shelters and legal aid. Victoria healed. Not completely. Trauma never fully disappeared, but enough to build a new life. To trust again carefully. To find joy in her work and her future. And Wade returned to his routine. His workshop, his property, his quiet life. But now he also volunteered at the foundation, teaching self-defense classes to survivors. He showed them how to fight back, how to be aware, how to trust their instincts. He taught them what he'd taught operators, how to be dangerous when necessary. 5 years after Alexander entered prison, Wade received another call from Kurt Hooper. Mr. Doyle, Alexander is being released on parole. 6 years served, model behavior. Model behavior? Wade had interrupted. Is that what we're calling survival? Kurt had ignored that. He's being released next month. He's going into a halfway house, mandatory counseling, probation for the rest of his sentence. I wanted you to know. Does Victoria know? We sent notification as required. But Mr. Doyle, Alexander isn't the same person. Prison changed him. He's terrified of his own shadow. He has PTSD, anxiety, depression. He's broken. I'm telling you this because I need to know. Will you leave him alone now? He's paid his debt. Wade had thought about that. 6 years of Alexander living in fear, being hunted, understanding what his victims felt. 6 years of consequences. Was it enough? As long as he never contacts Victoria, never even thinks about her or any other woman he might hurt, never breathes wrong, I'll leave him alone. But Kurt, you tell him that if he slips, if he shows even a hint of his old behavior, if I hear he so much as raised his voice to a woman, I won't wait for the legal system next time. I'll handle it myself. Permanently. You understand? Kurt had understood. He won't. I promise you. He's terrified of you. He'll never risk it. Alexander Booker was released from prison on a gray Tuesday morning. Wade didn't go to watch, didn't need to see it. He trusted that Alexander had learned his lesson. And if he hadn't, well, Wade still had contacts, still had skills, still had the will to do what was necessary. But he didn't think it would come to that. He'd seen the video of Alexander's release. A thin, scared man who walked with a permanent hunch, who flinched at sudden movements, who looked like he'd been to war and lost. That was punishment enough. Alexander would never be the same. He'd carry his fear forever, just like his victims had. Justice, real justice, wasn't always clean. It wasn't always legal. It wasn't always what the court said it should be. But it was what happened when you hurt the wrong person's daughter. That evening, Wade sat on his porch with Victoria. She was visiting for the weekend, bringing her new boyfriend, a kind, gentle man who worked as a teacher and treated her with respect and love. They'd had dinner, laughed, shared stories. Now Victoria was reading while her boyfriend dozed in a chair, and Wade watched the sunset paint the Tennessee hills in shades of orange and gold. Dad, Victoria said without looking up from her book, I heard Alexander got out. He did. Are you going to... She stopped, rephrased. Is it over? Wade considered how to answer that. The truth was complicated. The truth was he'd always be watching, always be ready, always be the shadow in Alexander's peripheral vision for the rest of both their lives. But Victoria didn't need to carry that burden. It's over, Wade said. He can't hurt you anymore. Can't hurt anyone. He's been dealt with. Victoria nodded, finally looked at him. Thank you. For everything. For believing me when no one else did. For fighting for me. For, her voice caught. For being the father you've always been. I know you did things. I don't know what exactly, and I don't need to know. But thank you. Wade reached over and squeezed her hand. You're my daughter. There's nothing I wouldn't do to protect you. Nothing. You understand that. I do. She smiled, and it reached her eyes now. Real happiness. Not the forced kind she'd worn in the dark days after the assault. I'm okay now. Really okay. I'm happy. And none of this defines me anymore. I'm more than what happened. I'm moving forward. Good. That's all I ever wanted. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the sounds of crickets and distant owls filling the air. Victoria's boyfriend woke up, smiled at them both, and joined in the quiet peace of the evening. This was what Wade had fought for. Not revenge, though that had been part of it. Not punishment, though Alexander had certainly been punished. Wade had fought for this moment. His daughter safe, healing, building a new life free from fear. He'd been training Delta Force operators for 24 years, teaching them how to hunt, how to survive, how to operate in the shadows. He'd trained them to protect America from its enemies. But the most important mission of his life hadn't been in some foreign desert or mountain range. It had been right here in Tennessee, protecting the one person who mattered more than anything else. And he'd succeeded. Victoria was safe. Alexander was broken. The Booker family had fallen from their pedestal. Justice had been served, even if it wasn't the kind taught in law schools. Wade Doyle finished his coffee, watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky, and allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. He'd done what needed to be done. He'd been the father Victoria needed, strong enough to fight, smart enough to win, ruthless enough to ensure the monster stayed down. And if Alexander Booker ever forgot the lessons he'd learned in those 6 years of prison, ever thought about hurting someone again, ever believed he might reclaim his old life, well, Wade would still be here, still watching, still ready. Some doors, once opened, never fully closed. Alexander had opened the door when he'd shown up at Wade's house and threatened him. When he'd admitted hurting Victoria and asked, "What are you going to do, old man?" Wade had shown him exactly what he could do, and that lesson would last forever.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.